The Prime Minister of Italy is in Canada and has been welcomed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Please have a seat. What a tremendous pleasure it is to welcome Prime Minister Maloney to Canada. Georgia, we just
Trudeau met Giorgia Meloni earlier today in Toronto. It's their second meeting in just a week. The two leaders were both in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, last weekend. Italy says the focus of the meeting is to strengthen ties between our two countries. And joining us with more on this visit from the Italian Prime Minister is Amy Verdun. She's a professor of political science at the University of Victoria. Amy, thanks for joining us. This is Giorgia Meloni's first official visit to Canada since her election as Prime Minister of Italy in 2022. So she's been in power for a little while, but maybe not that familiar for our viewers at home. What should Canadians watching this visit know about Meloni? Can you break down some of her politics for us?
So Meloni is a controversial Prime Minister of Italy. Some have argued that she's the most right-leaning leader that Italy's had since its fascist past. But she has been moving over to the center since having become Prime Minister, but people are still looking at it with some concern.
And so this is her first official visit to Canada again since being elected. What are you going to be watching for while she's here?
So last time when Prime Minister Trudeau was a bit worried about the relationships between Italy and Canada, it was about values and the LGBTQ community. So he's not spoken about this in the visit that we have here, at least not that we know of. So there's much more an attempt to look at common ground. Italy right now is the leader of the so-called G7, 7 advanced countries of the world, and Canada will take over that leadership next year. And so it's also important for the two countries to find common ground in that way.
And where is some of that common ground? Because you mentioned the interaction between the two was fraught at last year's G7 when Trudeau criticized Meloni over her position on LGBTQ rights. And now there's a much different tone with this visit. So where is that common ground for these two leaders?
So the geopolitical times have changed a bit more since we had, of course, the fulsome war in Ukraine, but now also the difficulties in the Middle East. So both countries need to find each other on that front. But there's also an opportunity here for the two countries to draw on the history of Italians in Canada. So there's a sizable diaspora of Italian descent in Canada. And of course, Italy has had a really strong position within the EU, but given the more right-leaning aspirations of Meloni, she's less inclined to go the EU route and more the direct diplomacy route. So I understand that there's been a Canada-Italy roadmap that's been put up forward for enhanced cooperation. So it's my understanding that Italy is choosing a route that's much more focused on direct relationships with Canada.
Can you talk about how Meloni sort of walks this line where she's embracing maybe more centrist or slightly more moderate policies on the international front, but still has to appease this far-right base in Italy, but how she's sort of able to walk that line and has emerged as this powerful player on the European stage?
Well, there'll be European Parliament elections coming up, and there's a big concern that there's a right-leaning wind blowing through Europe. And so she's playing on that card. So a lot of the concerns that people have on the left are that the voters are pushing towards the right. And she plays the card on values, like family values, like woke values, but be much more conservative in that domain. But in terms of collaborating with Canada, the focus is much more on industry, research and development, artificial intelligence, collaborating on peace and security, the rule of law, these kinds of things.
Now, as you said, Italy is hosting the G7 summit this year. What do you think we'll see from Meloni leading up to that in terms of this line she walks with a centrist personality internationally, more far right at home? How do you think she'll prepare as we get closer to this summit?
Well, in the meetings today, she's emphasized that she wants concrete results. And I think that she understands that as meaning support from transatlantic partners for the war to support Ukraine in the war against Russia. So I think that's what her primary focus has been. And I think we'll see more on that in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, thank you so much for your analysis today. Amy Verdun is a political scientist at the University of Victoria.